Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our Freshwater Stewardship Community webinar. My internet is not the best today, so you'll notice that I'm just off camera today, but you might recognize me from my voice from previous webinars. My name is Monica Seidel. I'm the Communications and Fundraising Manager at Watersheds Canada, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Simonovic here with us as our keynote presenter. We're going to go over just a bit of housekeeping for today and then get right into the presentation. So in the back wings of the call today is Nicole Dubé, which is Watersheds Canada's Freshwater Health Coordinator, and she's going to be doing all of the behind the scenes. So if you have any questions for our Q&A at the end that you would like to submit privately, you can do so by messaging her in Zoom. And if you're having any tech questions or questions about Watersheds Canada's programs, you can message her as well throughout the presentation today. If you are not familiar with Watersheds Canada, we are a national charity that's headquartered in Eastern Ontario. We focus on freshwater stewardship and education programs. So you can see two of our habitat restoration programs highlighted on the screen here. On the left, we have the Natural Edge, which is a shoreline restoration and planting program. And then on the right, we have a spawning bed enhancement that happened just a few weeks ago, where we're working with community groups to restore historic spawning beds. And then in the spring, so around now, the water will obviously melt. And so the spawning bed will be restored as the rocks fall into place. We have a number of other programs that I won't get into today, but if you are interested in learning about our programs that are delivered nationally and how you as an individual or a community group might be able to get involved, I encourage you to go to watersheds.ca/our-work. A couple of quick practical ways that you might be able to get involved with some of our programs this spring and summer. The first is our Natural Edge program, as I mentioned, shoreline restorations. So we work with different community groups across the country to help property owners, municipalities, and community groups restore shorelines. And so we do this through our starter kits. Watersheds Canada, as I mentioned, is headquartered in Eastern Ontario, and so that's where we deliver our planting program, but we also work with partners in different provinces, and so they're trained up and are able to do the site visits and the plantings as well. So if you are a shoreline property owner interested in possibly having a site visit this summer and having someone walk your property with you and talk about different things that are maybe happening that are threatening the health of your shoreline property, or you're just looking to add some beauty and habitat to your shoreline, you can email Chantel on our team, and she'll be able to point you in the right direction for different free resources and site visits. So you can email her at naturaledge@watersheds.ca. Another way that you might be able to get involved as a community group if you are in Central Eastern Ontario is by submitting a letter of interest for our fish habitat program. So we deliver our program. You can see the little photo here. It's our in-water restorations with woody debris piles. And so we are currently accepting emails of interest for these projects to happen either this fall or in 2025. So if you are interested in learning more about woody debris, how it's beneficial to the lake community and especially to different fish species, you can do so by emailing Melissa Dakers, who is our Habitat and Stewardship Program Manager, and you can reach her at info@watersheds.ca. One more practical way that I'd like to highlight today is our symbolic adoption program. So this is a way for individuals who maybe don't have a waterfront property that they can't be restoring, or they don't live on a lake where they can be restoring the habitat, but they still care about this ecosystem and the animals that live there. And so a way that you can still partner with Watersheds Canada is through our symbolic adoption program. Each of the symbolic adoptions includes a 5x7 postcard with artwork done by a Canadian artist, and it highlights different habitat features or species that your donation will benefit. And so we can put your donation towards habitat materials or resources to help Canadians across the country protect our lakes and rivers. So you can learn more about our symbolic adoption program and what options are available by visiting watersheds.ca/gifts. The program that we are here for today is the Freshwater Stewardship Community. As many of you probably know, we have been running this community for a couple of years now, and we have quite the library that's archived on our website. We have hosted 47 webinars since 2021, and we also have an accompanying handout or family activity sheet that goes with each of those webinars, and all of those can be accessed on our website. So the page that you went to register for today's session is the same one. You just scroll down to the bottom of the page, and there are a couple of different menu boxes that you can click through based on different themes. And so all of those resources are free. They are able to go as far and wide as you think they would be helpful. If you have a community group that you can post these resources in, or you have a newsletter that you send out to your lake association, all of these resources are free and available for you, and you can access them at watersheds.ca/freshwater-stewardship. So these are some of the boxes that you will find if you scroll down on that page, you click through, and then all of the webinar links and the handouts are there for you. We have one final webinar for our spring series this year. It will be happening next Thursday, April 11th. The title is Crash Course, and it's going to be looking at the different threats that our migratory bird species are facing and how we as individuals and as communities and municipalities are able to take action to help make their journey back home successful. And so we'll be joined by Safe Wings Ottawa, and they will be giving that presentation next week. So you can register for that again at watersheds.ca/freshwater-stewardship. But for today, I'd like to just introduce our speaker. So Dr. Simonovic is universally acknowledged as one of the world's leading authorities on application of systems analysis to water and environmental management. He advanced the understanding of water and environmental systems by providing decision makers with tools to support their sustainable management. He provides unparalleled contributions to global and local management of water that have improved the lives and livelihoods of millions of people worldwide. His work has a significant impact on our understanding of system linkages between humans and built and natural environments that lead to sustainable water resource management and resilience as a new developed paradigm. So with that, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Monica. I hope I can share my screen.
Yes, you should be able to take over.
Thank you kindly for the invitation to share with you a little bit of my experience. Today we'll be talking about floodplain mapping and one kind of special approach which takes into consideration very large spatial scales. I like to start my presentations with conclusions. In this particular work, for the first time, we use the latest climate modeling projections for understanding the changes in floodplain regimes over the Canada. Some of the findings are that the near and far future 100-year and 200-year flood events will add to a rise in the high and very high flood hazards. Simply with the changing climate, increasing frequency and magnitude of floods is something that's expected, and our work did show that. Flood frequencies in the far future will increase in different locations in Canada in to different extent. During the presentation, you will have a chance to see a few maps. And in order to make this modeling approach much more useful to general public, we developed a communication tool or communication instrument, basically a website that contains all the maps developed that I will try to demonstrate. I'll start very briefly with the motivation for this work and then spend a little bit more time on trying to explain what these maps are for. And I'll end up the presentation with possibly a live demonstration of the tool that can show these maps. Climate change is expected to affect flooding. Physics is relatively straightforward. The warmer atmosphere has larger capacity to store the moisture, and with that, we are expecting more rainfall, larger events to happen more frequently. In 2021, finally, IPCC, through different reports, recognized after the review of a very large number of references that there is a very strong connection between the climate change and extreme weather. And that was present also in the thinking and decision-making of our government, where, as you can see, the government committed considerable amount of money over the 12 years in order to extend the disaster mitigation and adaptation fund, and also another pot of money that will be used, and it's being used by Natural Resources Canada, Environment Climate Change Canada, and Public Safety Canada to work with provinces and territories to finish flood mapping for high-risk areas. Flood inundation mapping over the large regions is a very specific task, and it's quite different from traditionally what we consider to be floodplain mapping, because usually this is done on a much smaller spatial scale, where we combine the kind of hydrological and hydraulic modeling in order with other, topographical and other information in order to identify how much land will be inundated and what will be the water depth in different locations. When you look at the very large areas, this kind of hydrologic and hydraulic models are not as powerful, and they cannot easily capture the differences that may be occurring at every location. So that was the objective of this particular research that led to the work that I'm presenting here, basically to develop the methodology for high-resolution flood inundation analysis over the very large regions. Our focus was clearly on Canada. We also, in that process, investigated the utility of the publicly available data. And as you will see a little bit later, the methodology relies on this public information, global information. And if this global information is publicly available, that I think gives additional strength to the methodology. We use this particular work to investigate the changes in floodplain regimes across Canada. We identified the changes in flood inundation extent, to find out the change in the flood hazards, and to identify the change in kind of flood frequency. The work was funded by Canadian Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, NSERC, through the collaborative research grant with the reinsurance company Chaucer. A number of people participated in the work. You can see my collaborators listed on the slide. Here is the summary of the methodology. What you can see is that basically, in order to develop these maps on for the larger regions and on that kind of global scale, we usually rely nowadays on the so-called global flood models. There is an explosion of these kind of global flood models today. GloFRIS is one, List Flood from UK is another one, Kama Flood from Japan is the third one. The Kama Flood model is the one that we used. These particular models are, kind of utilizing the storage cell approach for routing the flood water through explicit final difference procedure in a kinematic wave approximation. Kama Flood, or the model that we use, its behavior is based on establishing a relationship between the water storage, water level, and flooded area through the parameterization of the subgrid scale topographic parameters. The main input into this type of models is simply runoff. So we base the methodology on the publicly available runoff information. This type of databases are called the reanalysis databases. They're combining the observations of the runoff together with mathematical tools to extend and provide longer sequences of information that can be used in further analysis. There are many different models, reanalysis kind of models, European, North American, and so on. They have their own characteristics, and they all have now the information that started in 1979 and up to the present moment. So because we were focusing on developing the overall methodology and in the same time looking, what kind of public data will be the best to use, at least for the Canadian conditions, we performed the analysis utilizing 4 different reanalysis models. They are then runoff obtained from these models is plugged into the CAMAFLOOD, the global model. CAMAFLOOD model includes the digital elevation information, the hydrologic information, the water network, all as layers that are already provided together with the model, and input, runoff input process through the model ends up in the, I'm sorry, in the simply water depth, velocity, and the inundation area. The resolution, the spatial resolution of this kind of modeling approach is approximately 30 by 30 kilometers, which is small when you take the size of the country and the areas where the global models are being applied, but large for using this information in the flood management. Therefore, we introduced one more step after processing and obtaining this information from the CAMAFLOOD model to downscale the information to 1 by 1 kilometer scale, spatial scale, and create the flood inundation maps at that resolution. This is exactly what the user of the tool that I'm going to demonstrate will see. Basically, the grid distribution of flood extent and water depth and velocity on the 1 by 1 kilometer spatial scale. So this methodology, or the application of the methodology, starts with downloading the runoff information from different reanalysis products. At the station locations where we have the observation, we did a very rigorous comparison between observed and reanalysis runoff values using the correlation and other statistical measures. Then the statistical fitting of the theoretical distribution, in this case, we used the generalized extreme value distribution, was done to the data. In order to help us in this analysis, we extracted 100 and 200 year at the beginning, and then, as you will see, we now have a very large number of different maps, starting with the 25-year, 50, 100, 150, 200, 300, and 500-year return periods. This gridded information is fed into the CAMAFLOOD model to derive the maximum flood depth and inundation extent for the whole country, and that was mapped and provided to the users for their consideration, use, and applications. Downscaling is done at the end before the maps are developed, before the maps are created, and this was done, as I said, to bring the information to 1 by 1 kilometer spatial resolution. So what do you get at the end is something like this. Obviously, this is a very large scale. This is showing the 100-year floodplain map of Canada in the GIS tool. You can zoom in into the region of interest and come down to resolution and scale that will be of interest to you. That was a very fast walk through the methodology. I was hoping to spend a little bit more time on demonstrating how you can use these things, but in order to help potential users, I think it was necessary to go through the background methodology in order to understand how the maps are developed. And here I'll try to review what these particular maps are for. I think the first kind of objective, the first purpose of developing maps, applying this global methodology, is to understand the overall flood hazard across the country. As you can see, these are very high, very small maps. But what we have done is, for each location in Canada, the grid 1 by 1 kilometer, developed a presentation of the maximum water depth that can kind of very easily give you immediate impression of what the flood hazard across the country is, what are the regions that deserve the higher attention, as well as do some kind of summary analysis and find out what is the proportion of the country that's under the higher flood hazard risk, and what are the areas that are under the lower, and so on. The second possible application is basically to integrate the map that we had that I previously showed with some additional socioeconomic information. In the maps that are right now on the screen, we combine, for example, the population density using the census divisions with the flood maps in order to identify, for example, what is the percentage of the population that's exposed to high flood hazard. The colors are obviously identifying the areas of, from very low to very high exposure. And I think a very quick view of these maps is very clearly showing that the areas where the higher population are seriously affected also by flooding, potential flooding, and therefore the flood hazard is pretty high. Some summary numbers are that approximately 3 million people live in the flood hazard areas. If we are considering the current or the historical information. With the change of climate, the inundation areas are expanding and water depth is increasing, and therefore the larger population will be exposed to these hazards. So you can do many similar type of analysis by simply utilizing the maps developed for, the previously described procedure developed for identifying the flood hazard, inundation, velocity, and depth, and other socioeconomic information that you would like to kind of associate with that. The third very important application, and that was actually the major objective and reason why I think we obtained the funding for this work, was to see how can we look a little bit ahead and try to assess what the climate change will do to flood hazards across the country. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you see the little bit modified procedure from the original one, where basically the top input that in the original case was based on observation and data that are kind of available through different reanalysis products, with the runoff information that is now predicted by various climate models. We utilized the really most recent climate information from so-called the coupled modeling comparison intercomparison project 6, CMIP6, where 17 different global climate models are considered, all models that are providing the runoff information, because our methodology requires as input runoff data. Climate models are run for various emission scenarios. So we utilize two of them. One is a kind of medium range of future forcing pathway, and another one, this is a SSP2 and SSP5, which is a high range of future forcing pathway to kind of see what will be the difference, and also generate the maps and identify the flood hazard that may be consequence of these various scenarios. We also consider three different time frames: historical, near future, and far future. You can see the years here. Historical was between 1980 and 2020, near future 2020 to 2060, far future 2060 to 2100. Each of them is considered, or the data was used for two different emission scenarios. So we had very large number of runs of the flood model, comma flood model, with runoffs from these different climate models for different time periods and for different emission scenarios. Comma flood model was not changed. It was used in the same way as with the historical data and the reanalysis data. The final information is downscaled in the same data, and the information or the maps were generated just for these different variations of inputs. So these are the type of information that you can derive through this particular task of finding out what the climate change impact is in this particular table for different temporal periods and different emission scenarios. We analyze the percent change in the flood inundation for various river basins across the country. You can very easily see that the high red, which is indicating pretty significant change in the inundation, is dominating some of the regions. And therefore, these will be the regions where probably much more detailed analysis, the traditional analysis on the different temporal and spatial scale should be done to further analyze the impacts. The second type of information that comes from this is also the flood depth and hazard, and these can be mapped across the country. As you can see, these different maps that I'm showing are basically for different return periods and different emission scenarios and different periods. But for all the periods that I identified at the previous slide, and all two emission scenarios and all return periods, these maps are available and produced and made available for general public. Beside the flood depth and hazard, we can show also the change in the flood frequency. And this is an interesting slide showing for 100-year return period and mid-range emission scenario and 200 and high-range emission scenario. And you can see how the red color is overlapping with areas where most of the Canadian population lives, indicating that much more frequently we will be facing pretty significant flooding in these different areas. So all this information, the methodology and the information and the ways of using this particular methodology have, in my opinion, very low value if you cannot share these results with the kind of general public and communicate these results to the general public. So what we have done to deal with this, we extended the project on our own to basically present all the information that was generated through the project in the form of the relatively easy, friendly web-based tool. The tool web page is presented here. The address, URL address is here, www.floodmapviewer.com. And what I'm going to do now, I'll stop my presentation, log into the tool, and try to basically demonstrate for you how this tool can be used to review the information generated using the methodology that I quickly explained. Can you please confirm that you see the screen?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is exactly what I was pointing out. You can see the address here. I logged in into the tool. Tool is organized in a kind of natural way of investigating something and showing the maps and so on. So you have options here to first kind of explore the maps. You have options to learn more about the methodology and also review the publications that are providing details. You have a pretty nice user guide, which provides the step-by-step instructions how to use the tools. And you have option to download all the information that we have generated, all the maps that are being generated. Number of researchers across the country are already using this information. I'm familiar with some work in Quebec and being contacted by colleagues from British Columbia. And they are utilizing these maps in order to do the analysis that they have interest in. You have also these cards that you can kind of, instead of menu, quickly look at the maps. Usually the process starts by reviewing the maps. What you see is just a Google map of Canada. And here, I need to move this. Here are the kind of three key sources of all the information that's available. The first is the set of general maps. We have a digital elevation map on the kind of medium resolution digital elevation map for Canada. High resolution, we have a drainage basins, and also we added the postal code map or layer. So by simply selecting the area, you will get immediately the presentation of the, for example, digital elevation model. Over that model, you can, for example, show the postal codes. And as you can see, this is a very detailed layer that provides the information, exact information about each of the postal codes. You can use the higher resolution digital elevation model. And also you can overlay or have the ability to show the major drainage basins in Canada. So these maps are something like a background maps that are providing necessary information to the users. We have here the legends for the digital elevation models. So the color scheme is converted into meters of elevation, and you can use that information too. The next two options on the main menu are basically now options to show the flood maps generated by the methodology and flood maps created for kind of different using different input data. The current condition maps are those that are utilizing the reanalysis information. If you overlay you see your cursor over the map, it tells you this is a historical map, 25-year return period flooding, created using the climate model, CMLP6 climate models. A little bit further, you have for different return periods these maps. A little bit further down, you have now for the reanalysis also the maps developed for 25, 50, 100, and so different return periods. When you select one of these options, you actually get on screen the flood inundation or the flood maps. What I would like, if it's possible, to put London, city where I am at the moment, in the middle so that so you can zoom in, obviously, and you can see the extent of flooding. Basically, these are the cells 1 by 1 kilometer where the shade of blue is providing the water depth. The interesting feature that we have added is that we can make these transparent so that you can actually now see where, at what location and what is exposed to this kind of flood hazard. What I think it's very important is here that This is downtown London, where the North Thames and South Thames join into Thames and then flow down towards the lakes. By simply clicking on any location, you obtain the information that is presented on the screen, coordinates of the location. And in this case, I'm showing only the flood map for 25-year return period, historical period, based on the North American reanalysis and the water depth in this location. We can combine that with the let's say digital elevation model and make this transparent. And now you will have additional information. That's basically the elevation which is picked up from the digital elevation model at that particular location. If we add another layer like a postal code, this is obviously very crowded now, downtown area, and postal codes are relatively small areas. Clicking on the particular location now will give you more coordinates, will give you the digital elevation, will give you the exact postal code, and will give you the water depth that corresponds to the map of 25-year return period for the North American reanalysis. What can be done here is interesting. We combine the OpenStreetMaps, which is basically the layer that captures the buildings and infrastructure. So you will have opportunity to kind of go to the layer and identify at the particular location, at the particular building, what the water elevation is. Here is the Western University. Here are the kind of areas, as you can see, that are kind of exposed to. I forgot to mention when I was discussing the methodology that we didn't include the protection measures. These are the kind of natural conditions, and many locations, within the city are protected with different infrastructure. Like in downtown area, we have a flood wall on one side of the North Thames, and along the North Thames we have dikes. We have a reservoir just outside of the city, which is also providing some protection. So the impact of this protection structure can be analyzed by introducing them in and seeing the reduction, but that was not done here. These are the kind of natural conditions what will happen. So you clicking on the university, you will see that there is a potential that some of the buildings which are close to the river can be flooded in the case of large floods. Okay, a similar procedure will be to look at the future conditions. Normally now we have a much larger set of maps. As you recall, we have different same return periods: 25, 50, 100, 150, 200, 300, and 500. But we have two emission scenarios, the mid-range and the high, so SSP2 and SSP5, and then we have three different time periods. So if you just put the cursor up, it will give you immediately what the map includes. It includes, in this case, the near future, 2020 to 2060, the SSP2 scenario, 400-year return period. And this is now available. This is now available for all mentioned return periods, time periods, and emission scenarios. These are obviously very similar kind of results, in a sense that you see the areas in blue. These areas are going obviously to be larger depending on what scenario you are observing, and kind of clicking at the elevation, you will find what is the consequence for water depth or water hazard. Okay, so these are just the presentations, visual presentations of the maps. I think they were quite useful. Many people were contacting me. I even got a phone call from a lady from Alberta that was very much interested to find out, should she buy the house the particular location. So she was asking for my advice, and I tried to explain that these maps are not, for making decisions at this level, but they can be informative or telling you what the potential exposure to a particular location is. This information can be downloaded. And if you click on the downloads, you will see that all these different maps are now available, and the full file can be straight downloaded from our website. But you have also option to select the area. Just a second. I pressed twice and okay, so you have option that you can now select the area and say, okay, I'm just interested at this particular location where the confluence. I don't want all these big files and so many different information. And if you now go into the downloads, you will see a little bit changed kind of format. You have now two options that you can download all the maps for the country, as well as only the maps for the clipped area. I think this is neat feature if you're really interested in a much smaller areas, that you can focus and reduce the size of the files and all the necessary computational consequences of very large files. So this will be the way of utilizing this information or using the information. I would like to kind of walk you quickly through the learning feature, where you have now the information about the project, software being used, methodology, as well as all the data. All the scenarios are described here and information fully provided. The references are also available. The number of publications that came out, and also the source of the data information, especially the reanalysis data, as well as the other data, public data that we used in developing of these maps. As you can see, also the 17 models that I mentioned are identified. The references related to them are also provided. So I think pretty good source of building the understanding of what the maps are showing and what the maps can be kind of used for. These are the references, and they're all provided in downloadable form for the users. And the final feature I didn't touch is the user guide. And user guide is nothing else than basically captured what I tried to do by this live demonstration. It's starting with opening the maps, using the menus, identifying what each menu is offering with, how you can clip the data, how you can download the information, and what you can do, and how and what the format for the downloaded information is. So this will be a very, I think, brief review of the information of the tool that we built to, just a second, tool that we built to make our work more applicable to general public. I'm back into my presentation just to use once more the kind of conclusion slide. Repeat that we use the latest climate information in this particular work, that we use 2 periods. I'm sorry, this slide is not updated, but we used 6 different return periods from 25 to 500 years. And we also did show through some of the maps that I selected to show that flood frequency in the far future will increase in different regions of the country to different level. Faster northern parts and few more in the eastern parts are really going to expose to much higher flood hazard. All the information about the methodology, development of the methodology, and the application of the methodology to kind of analyze the impact on the population are within this, 5 papers or publications that are all available to those who are interested. And any additional resources are available on my personal website. That means papers and on the methodological aspects that are linked to what these maps are also showing. Let me finish my presentation. I hope I didn't take too much time with one coming opportunity. Yes, it is kind of far away, but it's also time flies and it's coming fast. On May 20 to 22 in 2026, we are organizing at University of Western Ontario host 10th International Conference on Flood Management hosted by the Faculty of Engineering and Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction that I am serving as the Director of Engineering Works. And we'll be looking into adapting to global change and various innovative approaches to flood management and resilience. The conference website is already active. You can very easily pre-register without any obligation, but that will give you opportunity to receive the information that will be coming as we proceed towards the conference. With this, I would thank you for your attention, and I will be very happy to respond to questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you for that great presentation, and thank you for everyone for submitting your questions to me. If you still think of any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll read them out in a moment, and we can go through as many as we can. But quickly, before we jump into the Q&A, I wanted to let you know about our survey. So Monica will drop the link in the chat. If you wouldn't mind taking a couple of minutes to fill out our survey, it just lets us know what you enjoyed about today and topics that you're interested in learning about in the future.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I thought this was the question.
Oh, no, just a quick survey first, and I'll jump into the questions now.
Yeah.
So the first question I have is, what can homeowners do to prepare their properties against potential future flooding?
This is a very good question, and the answer is not kind of straightforward. The main reason is that each location may require different adaptation measures and approaches to be implemented. I think the first step is definitely to get full understanding of the exposure or the hazard. And the lecture and the presentation and the work that I introduced was really aimed in that direction, that we can kind of find out what the flood hazard is at different locations, that we can look into various future climate scenarios and see how this exposure will change. That will be the starting point. And then from that point on, you have various options, and obviously some options are at the individual level of trying to organize the house in a different way, depending where you are in the floodplain, or use some external measures to protect, like a smaller flood walls or flood protection measures. There are tons of different measures that can be applied. The Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction is very much focused on providing assistance to homeowners. So I would strongly encourage visiting the site. It's simply iclr.org, and downloading the many information that's available for the homeowners. Flooding can be of a different nature. And there is a backup flooding that may be, coming from the infrastructure and location of the building within the city, where the infrastructure is not sufficient to provide the protection. or it may be simply exposure to overland flooding that come from the river that spills the water over the banks. Yeah. So in these different cases, different measures make more or less sense.
Perfect. And we'll also be including an educational handout in the email that we send with the webinar recording. So I'll make sure to include those resources in there so everyone can find them later on. And the next question is from someone that's interested in knowing where flood forecasting mapping might be available. And they asked, is there a way to know the anticipated highest water level so one can ensure their residence is above that level?
Okay, so flood forecasting is a separate area, and what we were talking today is not directly related. Therefore, I would simply postpone answering that question, because I think you need to focus on a very different methodology, inputs, data, and sharing this information. The second part of the question, if I understand, is there a way of finding out what is the highest elevation, or is that? Yeah. Yes, this is what the floodplain mapping is for. There are different scales at which the floodplain mapping is being done. What I was talking today is at a global scale, so looking the whole country and understanding, where are the areas of high risk, lower risk, and what will be happening in the future under this scenario or that scenario. The next level is a regional level, when you will be using a little bit more detailed information, so that you can, at the regional scale, answer the question that means the highest elevation. We are usually not looking for the highest elevation. What we are usually using are the statistical kind of distribution, as I was mentioning, 2,500-year, 500-year map, and so on. That means that, let's say, for the design of a particular infrastructure, the standard is to use the flood elevation that corresponds to 100-year return period. This is how we design dikes and so on. If you are talking about pipes that should be carrying the drainage system, pipes should be carrying the water, we usually use the shorter. We use 25-year return period and so on. So yes, the answer is yes. We can assess this statistically, and this information is used within the municipalities, within the provinces, and even on the federal level to either decide and govern the land use, especially, and the development in the areas that may be exposed to the hazard or flood hazards.
And the next question I have here is resistance to designating flood zones seem to be growing from the private sector and insurance companies who are refusing mortgage insurance. What can be done in the wake of this?
Can you repeat the beginning of the question?
Yeah, so they were just commenting about how there's resistance to designating flood zones. And that seems to be coming from the private sector and insurance companies who are refusing mortgage insurance, and they're just wondering what can be done.
Okay, so this is a very good question, and relatively complex question to answer. The responsibility for flood management is handled by different provinces in Canada different ways. If you look at Ontario, we have conservation authorities, and conservation authorities are, this is primary responsibility of the conservation authorities to identify what are the floodplains, delineate the floodplains, and then there are, rules that are kind of created together with the province. What will be developed, or what will be allowed to be developed and located in these areas. Just an example, the 100-year return period, floodplains should be fully left to the river, no development allowed. 250, which is a wider area around the rivers, can be developed up to a certain level with the special approvals that come from the municipalities and conservation authorities together. So the way how the insurance comes into that picture is simply related to the implementation of these criteria, decision criteria. So if you are located in the floodplain, insurance is very hesitant to provide ways of, or the cost of the insurance will be extremely high. If you're close to the river in the areas, let's say 250 for Ontario, in other provinces it's a different criteria. Then insurance is nowadays providing some ways, and you can buy different insurance. The small problem that we are seeing now is that the insurance is not fully kind of regulated across the country. You have a situation where the companies are deciding, different insurance companies are deciding what will be the level and how they are going to, or what type of product they are going to provide, and what will be the cost of it. So if anyone is interested, my suggestion is simply to investigate what, for your particular location, different insurance companies are considering or making available. I'm sure that there are locations where the insurance companies will not be touching or providing any insurance because of the very high level of exposure and simply inability to kind of cover the cost. Insurance is the mechanism to share the risk. And very often the insurance companies are in Canada complaining that we have a small population, very large country, and that for the cost, the cost of flooding or flood insurance is very high. Now, with the more common flooding, more frequent flooding, and increase in the magnitude, they are seeing that the situation and the picture is changing. And many of the insurance companies are getting now into providing different products for insurance against floods.
And someone is wondering if you have any advice for enacting new bylaws that provide restrictions on work on existing structures, specifically on properties now designated as lying on a floodplain.
Properties on the floodplain, is that what you were saying?
Yeah, someone's just wondering if you have any advice for enacting new bylaws that provide restrictions on work on existing structures, and they're specifically properties on the.
This is a very significant question, and I think it's definitely the responsibility of those who are providing, who are responsible for flood management. The floodplains are dynamic. They're changing, and I think the maps that I am providing here are showing that. If you look at the current conditions and compare the conditions with the future climate change under any scenario, you will see the increase. So some of the properties that today are not in a floodplain may be in the floodplains of the future. So therefore, should be some kind of mechanism how to deal with this particular question. I know that in many cases we don't want to talk about getting out of the floodplains, but I strongly advocate actually that we should start that dialogue. The floodplains should be left to the river. Many countries in Europe, Netherlands, Germany, I'm not sure what was another one that I found out. They have a very, very sophisticated programs for moving the people out of the floodplain. The program is called Leaving the Space for the River. And simply buying the properties and moving the people out of the floodplains is the primary responsibility. In Germany, you have rivers which were totally channelized in order for, to provide for the navigation. In early days, most of the cities were developed at very close proximity of the water because of that. And nowadays, what they're doing, they're rich enough that they can do that. They're now getting rid of these dikes and letting actually river to more naturally inundate the areas across and moving the properties, moving the people out of these areas, because they're finding the flood damage or the expenses that are being introduced by more frequent and higher magnitude flooding is far exceeding the cost of removing and releasing the floodplains from the pressure of the development.
And just one last question here. It says, do hydro dams and generating stations that change flow velocity frequently affect the modeling system?
Sorry, didn't hear. Can you repeat the question? Slower, please.
Sure. So it says, do hydro dams and generating stations that change flow velocity frequently affect the modeling system?
Yeah, okay. Everything depends on the basically location. The dams are obstacles for flow, and hydropower stations, which are usually associated with dams, are utilizing or releasing the water, changing the distribution of flow in time. By changing the distribution of flow in time, you are definitely affecting the flood conditions downstream from the dam. So yes, they are affecting. However, if the flooding is a significant issue for the regions downstream, I think so-called the multi-purpose operation of these facilities is being considered in order to kind of provide the positive effect of storing the water behind the dam during the periods when you have high flows, and then releasing the water during the periods when you have low flows. That does change the hydropower production. However, the benefits and the costs are shared between these two different purposes related to this piece of infrastructure. So we do have methods and methodologies how to do that, and there are a number of hydropower dams that also include, as one of the purposes, flood protection.
All right, I think we'll wrap up our Q&A there because it's time. Thanks again for everyone for tuning in to our webinar today. Don't forget to quickly fill out that survey and sign up for our upcoming webinar. And I hope that everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.